Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. I see the participants coming in from the waiting room, so come on in. Thank you for joining us today. To kick it off, about a couple of housekeeping things. We are recording. We will send out the recording afterwards if you want to send it to your parents, your friends, everybody you know. And this is meant to be very conversational. So feel free to ask any questions or make comments or contribute in any way in the chat or the Q&A panel. We would love to participate real time in that way. So I am going to ask our guests to introduce themselves. I will kick it off. I am Mary Foster. I am the VP of Marketing and Demand Gen at Ambition. We are a sales coaching platform, and my role here is pipeline generation. So that's outbound sales development as well as inbound with team marketing. I've been here about 4 years and in the Nashville area. I'll kick it over to you, John.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Keenan. I'm the enterprise SDR lead at Shopify. We are a commerce company, both online and in retail locations. I've been at Shopify for the last 18 months, and I'm calling just outside of the Atlanta, Georgia area. Hey, Christina.
Right. Popcorn to me. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Brady. I'm the SVP of Sales at Speckit. We are a contextual learning platform that helps you maximize every minute at work. I am in the Chicago area and excited to be here. Gabrielle, over to you.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Gabrielle, or GB. I am a SDR manager over at Culture Amp, but also a content creator at Workweek. So have been managing outbound sales development teams for forever, since for 5 years now. And also with Workweek, create content specifically for frontline sales managers.
Awesome. I would love for everyone to put in the chat where you're from, what location you're from, where you work, all that good stuff. And also, if you want to, you can tell us in the chat whether or not you think a hamburger is a sandwich. It was a little convo we were having before the webinar started. I'm team, no, it's not, but we'll see what happens the rest of the time here. Okay, so today, kicking off this conversation, why it matters. This is a pretty strong comment, quote, whatever you want to call it, but basically talking about how it's important to develop people internally, because when we hire from the outside, we pay more to get less, meaning when you're bringing in outside hires, it says, external hires perform worse and quit more. And I would venture to say probably other people who wanted the promotion internally might also be more likely to quit. But before we go into the bulk of the conversation around like building a bench of internal candidates and developing people, is there ever a time when we should hire externally, and when would that be? So John, I'll open it up to you if you have any thoughts there, but is there ever a time when you should for sure hire externally, no questions asked, or kind of what do y'all think about that?
I would say absolutes hurt companies. And so I would never say like never hire externally or only hire internally. There's always an opportunity to do something. When you're thinking about leadership or sales leadership, maybe your team has grown past where your current leaders are confident they can lead the company in the next wave or the next scale of growth. It could be that what you're doing has gotten stale in your market and your product fit, and you need someone to come outside with some new ideas. And so I would never say never, but I would definitely be looking internally to see if you have some great candidates always, for a lot of the reasons that you just stated.
Yeah. And one thing too, like John, in your case, I know you guys built a team from the ground up. And so obviously there's going to be some external hiring as part of like creating a process from zero for
Absolutely.
sure. Okay. But in the spirit of that, not only attracting and retaining top talent, but developing the next generation of leaders is said to be, you know, if you look at the stats here, the thing that keeps the CEO up at night is actually not the economy. It's not some of these other things that we hear about externally, but it's about attracting and retaining talent and developing that talent, because that really is what makes up the company. Christina, would you say this is true for you and your priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not necessarily a bad thing when this is really front of mind for the CEO and the executives, because successful companies are always people first, full stop. If you focus on making sure that your people are happy and that they're fulfilled and that they feel like the payment that they're making in terms of time of their life is being paid back in the experience they get and their ability to enjoy their lives, if they're learning, if they're developing, then you will naturally have a very successful company. So if you are focusing company down and sitting and thinking, oh my gosh, if my people leave, I'm screwed. It's not a bad thing if you're really focusing on your people and you understand what you need to keep them happy and keep them at the organization. If you're panicking at night because you're worried that your people are going to leave and you have no context, then they probably are. If you don't know what ails your people, if you don't know what makes them really, really happy, if you don't know what they need to be driven, then you're not doing it, at least for some of them. And so am I kept up at night wanting to make sure that my people are happy? Absolutely, because I owe them that, but I also do the work and take the time to ensure that I know and understand their heart and their goals.
That's a great point. And I know something I see you talk about a lot online, GB, is like really getting to know your people. But how do you go about finding out what makes people happy, or like how they want to be developed, or how you're doing in this arena or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will make a shameless plug for one of my work week articles. I'll put the link in just a second, and trying to identify like what are people's motivations. I think that to me is really the first step. There's a whole there's a whole litany of like certain exercises that you can do, but one of the things that I found to be incredibly effective is like number one, trying to like build that rapport with the person first and foremost, getting them to like trust that when they say, hey, here's what I want to do and here's where I see my career going, they're answering in a way that is at the highest level of integrity for themselves, and it's not just answering a question in a way they think that you want them to answer that question. So there's a like a 7-minute exercise that I do with my team, where first one-on-one is we just chat for 7 minutes on like the person chats for is talking to me for 7 minutes, unstructured, just like tell me about your life, right? Like tell me about big decisions that are going on. And from that, I can start to understand what are big drivers for them, what is their why, like what compels them forward. I'll do the same thing with them as well. And then in future one-on-ones, I also love to do like a nice like balancing care and expectations exercise. So really starting to understand like how do they like to get feedback? How do they want me to show up for them? Like what do we do if we find out that the path they're on right now is not the right one? How can they raise their hand about opportunities that they want to go after afterwards? And of course, like growth plans that you want to develop with them. So I always love using the grow framework for this one. I think, yeah, you want to really focus first and foremost on building that relationship, building a relationship of trust, so that the person can actually be very honest with you about where they want to see their career going. Because if they're not honest with you about where they want to go, right, and you're offering up solutions that they don't care about, they might go and look for other opportunities elsewhere that do align with their true interests.
Especially if they feel like they can't trust you to have that conversation, because it's definitely a conversation. There has to be a lot of trust around of like, hey, I want this job. And that job might not be open at your company yet. And it might be a conversation of like, I'm willing to wait until it is, or it might be like, I want this job no matter what. And it may mean that I leave in a year. And it's like, that also should be something that you can talk about, I think, employee to manager. Everything that you just described, like, sounds like a phenomenal leader, which is very different than being an IC. So I am also going to put something in the chat, an article about how basically a promotion to sales manager is a job change, because all of those things are very different than just being like an individual contributor. And so some of these, some people, if you're looking to engage your workforce, it might be that they're on a development track to a manager or a promotion or some type of leadership role. And some people might not want that at all. And I think that's okay too, but we have to like you said, know, identify, and find out. So for people who do want that promotion, developing begins with coaching. And Steve put something in the chat that I really loved. He said, a sales leader is a salesperson who cares a little too much, which I loved that. It kind of speaks to the nature of like a coaching program. But the truth is, there's a stat right here that says 32% of leaders plan to depart within the year. Sales management is not very attractive right now. John, why do you think that is?
We could spend the next hour talking about why that might be. I think, especially on the frontline side, there's a lot to manage in both directions. You're managing macroeconomic conditions and worldwide conditions that change on a dime, that are so wildly uncontrollable, but also heavily affecting every bit of every market. But it's just a constant stress of managing down to your people, making sure you're providing the right level of support to them, but then also managing the expectations up. Those expectations tend to get harder and harder. It's very rare you hear senior leaders go, let's not grow this year. That's not a general statement you hear. And so that pressure's there. And then a lot of it comes from the whole point of this webinar, part of this webinar, and that, like, how are we developing future leaders? How are we giving or teaching the tools to our future leaders, our current leaders, to handle the burden of leadership, to handle that managing up and down expectation? It's not a surprise to me, this number. And then the support there doesn't seem to be there universally.
Yeah. And I think too, one of the things that I noticed based on something you said, GB, and like a lot of times it is a top performer who gets promoted into a manager role. You're a top producer, and with that comes a lot of shine, a lot of, credit, a lot of glory, and a lot of money. And sometimes a promotion in sales to a manager role or a leadership role, you're losing a lot of that recognition because it's more about your team than you. And you might also be losing some money. So I'm going to call on you there, GB.
Yeah, thanks. Everything we're talking about, like I know it's a shameless plug, but like I write about this in my newsletter called the One-on-One. So like this is why I'm like dropping newsletters left and right now. But there's a stat that says like the average age of the first time manager is 30 years old, and the average age of the first time someone goes through management training is 42 years old. So there's a huge gap, number one, in just like giving people in management positions access to the resources and the training that they need in order to do the job well. And when I think about like, just even for individual contributors, like why would someone not be performing well? Or why is it that we had these shooting stars who like do really well at first and then start to flame out? And I'm like, it's probably maybe, just maybe, there's something about the way they're approaching the job that is unsustainable. I think there's this question that I'm always asking, which is it because we just don't know what we're doing? And so we're just burning ourselves out and not knowing exactly like what kind of help we need to have, how to actually get to it. Are the resources that we have available to us, are those like sufficient enough? So I think there's certain things that like second line leaders can definitely do for managers, which is set really clear expectations. That I'll be honest, majority of companies that I've been at, those second line leaders have not done that. Right. So I'm like, if people don't know what their expectations are, then it makes sense why they're running around like chickens with their head cut off. I think the second thing as well is in the same way that we want to have time blocking and kind of organization and time management for reps, like we have to look at that for what does that mean for actual managers, so they're actually focusing in on the right things. I think the last piece of this too is, and I might probably like echoing what John just shared, is like also thinking about the certain skills that you wouldn't have as an IC, like what does that mean as a manager, and thinking about like, yes, we want to manage down, but we also need to find opportunities to delegate. We need to find opportunities to work cross-functionally. And so a second line leader can be really great in my opinion on really helping managers identify opportunities to offload work and really like optimize and maximize their days. So there's also things that managers can do themselves to help themselves and support themselves, whether that's through a coach, mentors, peers, community, whatever else it is. But I think there's just this huge 12-year gap, right, where we're not getting what we need in order to do our job effectively, or to even know, are we moving in the right direction? And so this is maybe just maybe impacting things, and why we're seeing this 32% number.
Yeah, Christine, I want to throw it to you also to speak here. Oh, you're muted.
So I click it, it doesn't work. 3 years in, still learning Zoom. Echoing everything that the other panelists are saying, I think is so critical. And to me, it all comes down to, what is a scalable methodology that new managers can use to help them learn how to prioritize? Because we need the support from cross-functional partners, absolutely. But at the end of the day, we can't throw everything. And even if it's positive things, right? If we throw incredible training and incredible resources at frontline managers, a lot of times they don't know what to do with all of that. Everything feels like it's being thrown at them all at once. And at the end of the day, what the company is measuring is their output, which is a lagging indicator of what they're doing right now. And it can feel impossible to catch up to that. So one thing that I tell not only newer leaders, but also experienced leaders is, if you've never looked at the important and urgency matrix, basically it looks like this. And one axis is important and the other axis is urgent. And you have to think through every task that you've been given and run it through that to determine, what do I prioritize now versus what do I delegate? Now, when I delegate or delay, I have to communicate that, right? That's the one piece. If you decide I'm gonna delay this, I'm gonna delegate this, or I'm simply not the right person to do this, that's where coaching on how to communicate your boundaries comes into play. And when you tie it to, over the next week, I am focusing on these important and urgent areas of the business. While this is important, it's not urgent. I'm going to do this next week. Is that okay? Or maybe you're working in sales operations and maybe you're a Salesforce.com admin and you're looking at the big projects that you have to do to drive the company forward. But sales reps are making mistakes in Salesforce and they've submitted 15 tickets to you asking the same questions that you've already answered. Now, that may not feel very important in terms of the work that you have to do, but damn, does it feel urgent when you've got 15 sales reps like, I'm waiting on you to close this deal. So understanding where in the matrix it falls and then learning how to communicate your boundaries not only makes you look like a professional, but it's also going to help you to communicate your needs and then get the job done that matters for your role. Do not take on things that are not important and urgent right now. I can't stress it enough.
Yes, I love that. And I think there is a lot of coaching to be done, which we'll get into some of the specifics here, because it's not just, the managers that are feeling burnt out, but SOS, so are the sellers. And that's potentially from a lack of strong management, because like we talked about, managers get promoted, they get no skills, no frameworks, no help. They're trying to lead people who also feel now burned out because they don't have great leadership, not, any ill intention, but just it's a lack of training, a lack of coaching, and a lack of resources, it sounds like, from what I'm hearing from you all. So how do we get better? How do we change? And what can we do, or what can people on the call today do? We'll kind of talk about this, and it, no surprise, but everything I'm hearing and everything I think we'll talk about, it really does boil down to being a culture thing. So let's talk about status quo today, where we're at, evaluating the effectiveness of current leaders. So if ineffective leaders are the number one reason why people leave their company, we obviously want to start there with what we have today and how do we evaluate. So is it rep sentiment? Is it one thing that we talk about here is not just if the team hits quota, but how many of those reps hit quota? Like, is it just you have one superstar and everyone else is drowning? Or is it kind of like everyone is doing well? But how would you all approach, John, I'll throw it to you first, but how would you approach evaluating the effectiveness of current leaders in today time?
First, I'd love to just take like a collective deep breath. We just took on some like really heavy stats there, and like things are still okay, right? Like people are, yeah, there we go. All right, let's just take that collective deep breath. There are solutions to some of these issues, and I think so. How we evaluate effectiveness, I think one of the things I love about sales is that there is a relatively objective measure of, are you doing well? And so attainment to your targets is absolutely something that I'd be looking at. I love the idea of blind 360s or anonymous 360s, where you're getting that qualitative, that emotional feel from your people. like I'm constantly asking for feedback from my team, but I know that if they were given a chance to anonymously give it, that I'm going to get much better feedback. And you want to write it in a way and make sure you're getting that feedback in a way where you can't tell their personal voices through it, right? Make them feel as comfortable. GB talked about it, like make sure that they trust that what they're giving isn't going to be coming back in retribution, that when we're doing reviews that it won't affect them. I think things like attrition are things that you can evaluate leadership on. Like, are people leaving in droves? If they are leaving, why are they leaving? Is it within the controllability of the leadership? And are you developing? Are you finding ways to engage your team that they're leaning into the work, that they're asking for more, that they're asking for that enablement, if you will, to level themselves up, right? Like, I think a team of people who want to keep getting better and they're raising their hand to get better across the org tells me you have a good leader, because they're raising the bar for their team. And so the team wants to raise their bar for themselves.
Yeah. Christina, GB, do y'all have anything to add here?
I think John covered a lot and agreed with everything that he shared. I think if there's one more thing, and Mary, you'd asked the question of like, okay, like what is it? Is it just kind of overall team performance? Is it where maybe you can have one person like really carry you versus having majority of reps hit? I think I started to get, as a manager, I started to get the best performance from my team when I thought about part of what was going to make me successful personally was when 80% of my team was hitting their number. Because I wanted to create a winning locker room. So like what I started to realize is if people are not successful, it absolutely tanks our culture. It tanks our morale. People are not going to like, and then it's two people are upset, 3 people are upset, everyone hates me. So it was just better to have it so that like, all right, want to make sure that the majority of my team, and I said 80% of my people were going to be hitting their number. And if I had one person missing, we'd work on that, right? But it wouldn't be like one bad apple couldn't all of a sudden take down everybody else because everybody else was at least hitting.
Yeah.
So it's anything that I would add on to what's already been shared.
I'm like thinking of that too through the lens that Christina shared of urgent and important. Like your whole team is important. Every rep is important. But if one person is bombing or having unusual bad luck, that might be your urgency is where to spend time as a manager. And you can differentiate how you spend your time. It does not have to be all equal. And it'll probably be different month to month. Like some people may go through asynchronous coaching and maybe you do a bi-weekly in-person. Some person who needs a little bit more one-on-one time might be that weekly in-person touch point. Like you can differentiate your coaching style for different teammates, which I think is important.
Yeah. Always be wary of hero metrics on top of that. Like it's very, very easy to be like, at the end of the day, it's attainment. And it's like, well, is it? You know, so like, I think, and that's kind of like a +1 on everything. I absolutely love what John said. There was like 4 or 5 nuggets in there that are so important, but like, and if you don't know what a hero metric is, we can talk after this, but it's a common trap.
Yeah. Y'all find Christina on LinkedIn and talk about hero metrics. I'm going to. Okay, so this goes to something that someone said earlier too, of like setting expectations. And we'll talk about like a manager profile in a little bit, but defining a culture of coaching. What I love about this is that you can use a quarterly OKR. You could use your H1 or H2 kickoff. You could start at the beginning of the year. It's never too late to start. So if your sales org has no culture of coaching today, that's okay. If you have something and you want to make it better, that's okay too. There's lots of these like milestones or times that make sense to be like, we're going to create a culture of coaching here. And so I do want to ask though, in y'all's orgs as sales leaders, do you own the coaching programs, or is that something enablement owns, or how does coaching culture work at your orgs? Christina, you first.
I'll kick it off. I mean, to me, Coaching is one of those things where I liken it to breathing in an organization. One owner is almost not fair. The idea is like when it's a culture of coaching, there isn't like who owns kindness at the organization. Is that enablement? Is that ops? It's like coaching is something that we should always be doing because at the end of the day, the rising tide raises all ships. And so enablement is ensuring that coaching is happening. But as an executive leader, so am I. I want my reps to coach each other. I want my AEs to coach their BDRs. I want my BDRs to coach my AEs because the experts in my org are at qualifying accounts, my BDRs, right? They should be the best in the organization at doing that, and they can provide meaningful coaching. So for me, a culture of coaching means I don't care what your role is. I don't care what your tenure is. I don't care what background you came from. In fact, I celebrate that. And you have expertise that you can share. And at this company, we want you to, and we need you to. And this goes as far as at a prior organization that I was at when I was at Glassdoor. I had a gal on my team. Her name's Erin O'Malley. She's wonderful. And she was amazing at like putting together floral arrangements. Now I'm objectively very bad at that. And not to say I've ever wanted to learn how to do it, but one day she brought in a bunch of flowers. She's like, does anyone want to learn how to put together a flower arrangement? And we were like, you know what? Yeah. And it was just this idea of learning from our peers and sort of embracing the experts around us. Culture means we all own it, every single person.
That's a great point. And honestly, I haven't heard that one before. Like it is typically like, this is a leadership OKR and I am the owner, or I am the enablement person and I am the owner. But I like the lens of like, maybe that's how it starts, right? Like someone has to champion it. But if you have a culture of coaching, it is owned by every single person at the org. I think that's so smart. GB, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about, for me, if there were like a few categories that would go into this culture of coaching, like how am I going to operationalize a culture of coaching within my team? I think there's four pieces to this. To me, there's like, all right, how do we communicate? There's how do we operate, like our operating rhythm. There's kind of like, how do we make decisions and being data informed? And I think there's this last piece that is going to power everything, which is it's rep empowered. So like in the same way that I want to, if I'm looking at the business in a certain way, I want to make sure that my reps are there too, so that any time that there is going to be any coaching, any feedback, any whatever, or if we have disputes and how do we solve disputes, I want us to at least be speaking the same language so that we're not having that internal thrash. So I always like using like radical candor. I love using the frameworks that are suggested there. In terms of an operating rhythm, like making sure that reps know exactly when their one-on-ones are going to happen. It's always the same. We know what information we're going to be sharing. They know how to prepare for it. They know how to analyze the data. That's a data informed piece. They have visibility into their entire business, so they know what I'm looking at. And the last piece of this, as I mentioned, is like if there's any expectation that I have of my rep, like this to me is the coaching piece, is like I need to make sure that I've enabled them and empowered them to be able to meet, if not surpass, that expectation, right? So like if I haven't done that yet, that's like on me. But once that has happened and once they've shown that confidence and competence in that, like that to me is really what would power a culture of coaching.
Yeah. Yeah. And something interesting in the chat is from Steve, coaching belongs to the manager always. And I think I understand that take of like, at the end of the day, like he goes on to say, enablement has the tools or common standards or pathway or reporting, but it really is you, the manager, and you, the rep, who owns the success of that program. And I think that is important to call out here. Another thing to do when we're talking about building the bench, so you want to have a culture of coaching. A lot of coaching is happening because then that makes the way for people to get developed into managers, but also instills in them, once I'm a manager, that's a big part of the role. Another way to build your bench is to look for leadership in unexpected places. And so I think for us, the way we've seen this work is we have people go from sales development to customer success. We've had customer success go to sales, account management, to sales, to solutions, to support. We have people move cross-functionally a lot of the times. But I'd be curious, to you all of how do you find potential leaders? Like, it might not always be the top seller. They might not want a manager role for reasons we talked about earlier. And it might be someone from, you know, maybe a B range player. I don't know. How do you all look for leaders in unexpected places?
I'll start. I think that leadership is a very specific personality trait or skill that can be developed that's different than individual contributor success. It's even different than like coaching ability. It's a different thing. And so I'm looking for leadership from my team when we're undergoing change management. Territory changes are happening, comp changes are happening, alignments are different. And I know there's been a lot of change over the last few years that people have had to handle. So I'm looking at people who rally the rest of their team around it and still understand what their North Star mission is and bring them together. And they're the ones who may not win all the time. Some of them are the standout players, but they may not be the ones who win all the time, but they're always sharing how they're winning. They're trying to keep everybody as successful as they're finding their success. And they're trying to multiply. And to me, that's what a leader's doing is they're keeping an energy level across the group and directing it at what the company, the division has defined as its North Star. And so I'm always looking that way. And to kind of capitalize on something you mentioned, Mary, like in sales development, I love managing a team in this world because I look at it as like the lobby of the revenue org. And that your career can go anywhere you want when you're in sales development. If you do it really well, you should be able to branch out into anything you want. And so, especially if you're working with young professionals, you should constantly be looking, where can this person show the best success for themselves? It might not always be full cycle sales. It might not always be customer success, those common pathways, but leadership should always be a part of that discussion. How are they bringing people with them? And energy and success.
I really love what you called out about, you know, looking for someone who wants to rally and raise everyone around them, because I think a lot of times people will hear, oh, you have strong leadership qualities. You're a leader. From the time I was young, people would always be like, oh, you have strong leadership qualities. And I think that just meant that I was confident and loud. It didn't necessarily mean that I was wanting to raise all the ships around me. You know, it might've just been that I was like comfortable being in front. And so I think it is important to talk about the traits of leadership, of wanting to bring people along, wanting to create opportunity for other people, sometimes putting people in front of yourself, team over everything. I think that's really, really important. Christina, GB, do y'all have anything to add here?
I a big +1 to everything that John shared. Like I think you saw both Christina and myself where he's like during a lot of change, and we're like, yes, like yes, because like those are the people who are just like there can be a group of folks who are like, woe is me, why is this happening and whatever. And then I think when you think of like a leader, right? And maybe even a more general term is they're the ones who are like, doesn't really matter what you throw at me. Like, this is yet another opportunity for me to learn more about what I'm capable of. And so I think when you can have those kinds of people, like what you would expect out of a manager, like who are the people who are already showing up like that, like without the title, without the comp plan, like without the responsibilities. And I think there's like one of the things that I really like to help get me more feedback about these kinds of folks is as a manager, every Monday, I run a recognition session as a Monday morning kickoff. And so we go through like, hey, like here are the priorities, here's the updates, the pacing, here's what to expect. But we also have a time for everyone on the team to nominate one person for like kind of a one team award, right? So like, hey, like who's the one person that you want to shout out last week, who helped you, who rooted you on, who whatever. And I think this, number one, it helps you as a manager start to identify who are the people behind the scenes who might not be the loudest in sharing about what they're accomplishing. But I think also secondly, what ends up happening is you start to instill a culture of leadership within your organization as well. that's rep drip, like it's peer driven, right? Not just the manager. So I've seen that work really, really well, and really elevating the whole of the team and aligning to that culture of leadership. And it being peer driven as well, by having those like recognition sessions where reps are sharing out and shouting out their peers.
That's so smart. And it goes along with what Peter said in the chat of like facilitating more peer-to-peer things, because exactly to your point, someone who isn't maybe the number one performer or super braggadocious, but they're very good at bringing out the best in other people around them and shouting out and recognizing opportunities, that very well might be the ideal profile. And it's a good way to surface that. That kind of goes really well into our next talk point of building success profiles for these critical roles. So it's a kind of an unfair ask to promote someone into this management position and give them no guidance other than like hit the number. So I don't know why we don't do this more. There's kind of a loose job description that someone probably got from internet.com and never really actually thought about what it should be. So building a success profile, what is something that you would put in the profile, like to help people measure capabilities, and help them self-select if like, hey, I actually think I do want to do that, or hey, I actually don't want to do anything about that at all. Christina, I'll kick it to you first, but curious what you would look for here.
Yeah. The way that I start to answer a question like this is always first with like a little bit of an anti-answer, which is we have a tendency to accidentally give folks predetermined career paths and also make certain roles look like the ideal roles more than others. We also see that just in society, like there's an example where women are expected to be mothers, right? And it's like, if you don't want to be a mother, then you're going against the grain versus just that's one path, right? Same thing with BDRs moving to account executives. Same thing with senior account executives who are very successful. Like, do you want leadership? Like, it's like, that's the next big, amazing thing. And if you don't want that, well, okay, so you don't want leadership. Well, then what, right? So the other thing we have to make sure that we do is the role should match what I, as the individual, want for my life and for my skill set and where I'm best served within the organization. So the first step in building success profiles is to understand where your people want to go to match their skill and their will with the role. And then make sure that you don't accidentally create a scenario where the job that they choose is like, okay, well, I guess if you don't want leadership, then we'll find me marketing. I don't know, right? So it's don't give that predefined career path, have conversations with your people. And then I always say to split these for success profiles into skills and behavior. Once you have the skill and the behavior that you need for every single role, then you divide that into mastery and advancement, right? So have I mastered the skills and the behaviors, and how long does that typically take? And what amount of support do I need? And once I've mastered those skills and behaviors, now I'm ready for advancement. What additional gaps do I have in terms of my skill and my behavior to be able to advance to where I want to go? And how do I feed myself those skills and behaviors now while I'm in my existing role, so I can seamlessly step into the next? So I guess I think in quadrants today.
I like it. I like the framework. And while we're here and talking about, yes, does this person want this? Stop sending people on predetermined paths that they might not even want. It is a good point that you might have a small team and you don't have someone internally who wants that role even. And so, Arash, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, asked this question in the Q&A of, we talked a lot about leadership behaviors that managers can see in their current reps. But what about external hires? Would you consider hiring a successful rep from another company to become a leader? And so like, how do you look for something in that interview process, right? Because you don't get to see them on the recognition weekly call as just a rep, or you don't get to see some of these other things that you do internally. So let's say you do want to hire someone externally, maybe they're a rep, first-time manager role. What would y'all look for?
I just have to chime in and say, Arash, what is up? Arash is a good friend of mine. He actually reported up to me at Glassdoor. I'll answer this really quickly and then I'll be quiet because now I'm talking a lot, but I absolutely would. You don't have the experience until you have the experience, and not everybody who would be an absolutely incredible leader has the opportunity at their existing organization to step into those shoes. And so I don't need to see you do the job in order to evaluate if you can do the job. I need to see the skills and the behaviors, and I need to see if you are thinking like a leader. I'm also a big fan in hiring people with non-traditional backgrounds. Like on my team right now, I have a former physical therapist. I have a former ballerina. I have a former restaurant manager. Like I have folks who come from these non-traditional backgrounds, and you come from anywhere, right? I have a theater major. So it's like, Arash, I would never look at somebody and say like, well, you haven't been a leader before, so you can't be a leader here. I personally think that's really closed-minded.
That's amazing. And I can say, you know, Christina, having interacted with a lot of people from Speckit, it's working. Whatever y'all are doing, it's a great, great group of people. So very, very cool. Okay, so next, want to make sure we get it all. We've talked a little bit about peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer coaching, like role playing. So I think a lot of people do this at the individual contributor level, like you can call coach each other. But what about manager to manager peer-to-peer learning? And so I think this can be why like documented coaching programs or measuring where it can actually be, you know, helpful in guiding people. So if you have one manager who is like GB and has 80% of their team to quota, and you have another manager who's hitting because they have someone who's carrying the team, so they don't necessarily stand out as being like a non-performer manager, but their team is not all where they need to be, facilitating peer-to-peer learning opportunities. Or do y'all participate in that? Or did you ever get that as sales leaders, like learning from other managers? Is it formalized, informal, or any thoughts there?
I wish there was more of it. Like, I think every company that I've been at, anytime I'm meeting up with my manager or I'm having a skip level with my second line and they're like, hey, like, what are ways that we could do better? I'm like, I think we can facilitate more learnings amongst the managers. I think it's at least what I've seen work thus far in the absence of having something that's maybe like second line level driven, is the managers amongst themselves like will have meetups. So it can be either one-on-one sessions or it can be in kind of group settings, like that's either regionally based or segment based, whatever else it is. But like, so for example, from my side, I meet with, like, I'm mid-market in North America for Culture Amp, and I chat with our EMEA outbound manager on a bi-weekly basis. And so we'll either, so one of the things that's happening on our side is we're dealing with a lot of like people related management, like challenges. And so there can be this really great opportunity to go like, hey, like, here's what I've got, here's what you've got, and we'll share, here's how we're approaching it. And then we'll brainstorm or soundboard with each other in order to figure out like, hey, like what is, and a lot of times it's like, yo, you're amazing. Like, just do what you do. Like, just go for it. Like a lot of times it's just kind of like validation and affirmation more than anything else. But I think there's also other times where it's like looking at the data, and if I see one of my peers, like her reps have booked 10 meetings this week. And I'm like, hey, your reps booked 10, where are these coming from? Here's some of the things that I saw in the data. What do you see? And what are your reps saying? And she's like, hey, here's this, like, we think that this persona is having a lot of success. So then I'm like, cool, me and my team, we're going to test it out. And now, and we've codified it in sequences. I can share out the data. And so we realize like, this is the persona that we need to go after. So I think just like, sure, it can be facilitated by director level leaders. I think there's also the opportunity for managers to do things on their own volition as well. And especially if you have at least one manager who's very like has a really strong data practice, they can start to help inform like how can other parts of the business also benefit from the things that we're doing on our side.
Yeah, I love that. And John, I know you mentioned that's something important to you too. Like you love looking for peer learning development. How do you currently, or how do you wish it worked?
Yeah, wish it worked was definitely a more formalized process. But I think everything GB said, I would mimic. And I think if anything, it speaks to a really strong leadership culture where she is, a similar situation where I am, where you have a lot of this like kind of peer mentorship, peer sharing, like knowledge sharing. when you think about data perspective, someone's always really into Salesforce dashboards or reporting. And so once you find that person, as long as you have that leadership and that sharing style culture, you just start talking about the different trends. You talk about the people, personnel situations that you're trying to handle. And I know a lot of reps have like players only chats where they can have their opportunity to talk about what's going on at just the rep level and management eyes off. And I think managers need the exact same thing. Leaders need the same thing. How are you handling this? Spotting trends? How can I pivot my business? And so yeah, 1000% everything GB just said.
Yes. One thing we do at Ambition, mostly powered by our own software, is great, is like, hey, what does your one-on-one sessions look like? Like, what are y'all reviewing? What are you asking? It does bring out things like, what personas are we targeting? And you can actually copy it and share that way. So that is nice. But I think we're all still figuring out peer-to-peer opportunities at the manager level. Christina, I'll let you close this one out if you have anything else to add on how you wish it worked or how it works for you or how you seek it out today.
The one thing that I would always caution against in here, more anti-advice from me, is be careful putting your people in a position where you try to have them give you feedback directly if you're in a leadership seat. There's ways that you can gather feedback. It was mentioned earlier by John, like the idea of 360 feedback or skip level feedback, but I have a lot of really, really wonderful managers who have great relationships with their team. And this is really something that is very specific to individual contributor with their frontline manager. It's a little bit different when you get into executive leaders who are communicating to each other. It's easier to give feedback up and it's less threatening. But an individual contributor giving feedback to their manager, even if that relationship is incredible, is always a really double-edged sword. At that point in time, as an individual contributor, your manager has a lot of control over your success at the organization and over your ultimate career growth. And you want to maintain that relationship for multiple different reasons. And when you're in a situation where your manager says, hey, do you have any feedback for me on how I can be a better leader for you? Sounds like a great answer, but now I'm trapped. Because if I actually say, well, it actually is an area where I'm seeing a little bit of weakness or area for you to constructively improve, and you give them that feedback, you don't know how they're going to take that. And if they disagree with that, or if it somehow impacts the relationship, now my career is impacted by that no matter what. So I either give the feedback in what feels like an unsafe environment because you never truly know, or I say, you're doing great. You're awesome. You are so great. Can we keep talking about my promotion up in salary band, right? So I either tell you what you want to hear, and then you leave that room going, my people love me. Everything is great. I don't feel the need to improve. So if folks volunteer feedback to you, absolutely always take that. But trying to create a culture of coaching and feedback where you are requiring somebody who is a direct report to give you direct feedback in person, it is a double-edged sword. And I've consulted with, I would go so far as to say, thousands of frontline managers via executive coaching, and it rarely goes well or actually helps them grow.
Yeah, great point. Thank you all so much for so many great points today, so many good learnings. If anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or the Q&A now. And then we'll go down the line here so that people can stay in touch and continue to network and communicate with y'all. John, where can people find you? Are you on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn, John Keenan.
Awesome. GB, where can people find you, your newsletter, all your great content?
Yeah, you can of course follow me on LinkedIn. I'm going to tell you there's too many communication channels and I'm becoming increasingly worse at LinkedIn, but my newsletter, that's the one. If you go onto that, I promise I will respond. There's a link to subscribe.
Very cool. And Christina, are you on LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Christina Brady.
Thank you all so much. Great advice. Great talking with you all. I'm also on LinkedIn, Mary Foster. There's probably a lot of us, but you'll find me. Thank you all for attending, for talking, and I will talk to everyone soon. Bye.